Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's good to see you again. And this is a crucial topic, especially after the events last week in China with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eastern Economic Forum. The new era has been put into existence, and it can be denied or tried to be fought against from the West. But what we're seeing is the end of the unipolar era, the end of a 500-year period of European colonialism. And there are some people who don't want to give that up, of course. But what we're seeing now is the emergence from the global south of new leadership looking to the ideas of what can enable them to improve the conditions, not just for their countries, but for their neighbors. So I think this is a crucial topic. I'll just say one thing in the beginning, that I think what we're really talking about is the difference between a world of sovereign republics working together for mutual benefit,
Absolutely.
as opposed to a world of an empire and colonies. And this idea of sovereignty is one that has been prevented from coming into existence because of the power of the global corporations and the fact that they're running their own economies into the ground. So the Western system of the last 500 years is going to end, and it's going to end hopefully peacefully with a recognition that the interests in the so-called global north and the global south can be brought together. But I think anyone who thinks that the global south is going to continue as it has for 500 years is misreading the goals and desires of especially young people who are becoming leaders in Africa and Asia. And so the unipolar order is dead. Let's welcome the multipolar order, or what President Putin likes to call the new polyphonic harmony, with many voices speaking and performing in harmony. Well, as I was saying, I think these global institutions have outlived their purpose. I would not be unhappy at all to see the International Monetary Fund be dismantled. The structural adjustment programs that the IMF has come up with have done more to set back the process of development in the global south than wars. And that's why the need for new institutions is so crucial. One of the things the Chinese are doing as an interim measure is to trade in national currencies. And this is going to require, again, some time to do, because you have to figure out how do you cover the imbalances and things of that sort. But the current system, the SWIFT system, is a weaponization by the Western banks of the financial system, with sanctions, with credit cutoffs, and the imposition of structural adjustment programs.
Sure.
So I think the quicker we leave behind the existing institutions, the better. And that doesn't mean we have a totally anarchistic junking of the system. But it's interesting to note the BRICS are not talking about dumping the dollar, but making it fair, making the US and Western Europe play by the same rules. Well, when you're talking about Europe, you have the situation where you have the European Union, in which the individual nations no longer have sovereignty. And the power is in the hands of primarily the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. But these are three countries that have a strong commitment to continue the post-World War II order. And they're delusional in that they think they can do that. Now, that's why there's a war going on against Russia in Ukraine. The decision was made in 2014 with the coup in Ukraine to try to break the power of Russia. And why were they so upset about Russia? Well, Russia is a Eurasian country. Russia was orienting toward China, toward India, and toward the global south.
Yeah.
And Macron and the Germans, Merkel and then Schultz, and now merits, and then the string of mediocrities and brain-dead figures in the Prime Minister's position in England believe that they still have the power to impose an imperial system. Now, I just want to throw something out here for the discussion of how you move from the unipolar to a multipolar world. You have to address the question of credit. And I think this is something where Africa does have a lot to bring to the table. What is backing up the currencies in the West right now? Nothing. It's speculation. They've shut down industry. They are not able to loot the developing sector the way they used to. And so they're in a pile of debt which is going to collapse. That's what happened to Bayrou and Macron. They can't cover the debt. That's what's happening in the United States. And the fact that the United States is a military power doesn't negate the fact that it can't pay its bills. So what is the basis of credit? And this is where we can learn something from China, which has learned something from the better times of the economies in the West. Credit is based on your ability to increase and improve your productivity based on investment, and that means debt, in scientific and technological progress. That's how you increase your wealth. African countries have been denied that right by the colonial system. And by putting them in debt so that they have to trade their raw materials and their labor force for to maintain any kind of credit. But real credit can be generated internally, and that's why the new banks represent an alternative. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization Bank, the BRICS Bank, and by moving into this new era of sovereign credit systems, national credit, national banking, you create the basis for the equalization of power, which has been denied by the looting and predatory practices of the IMF and others. So I think when you talk about governance, this is really one of the key points. How do you establish agreements on credit policy? And the step toward that now is national currencies, and especially China trading with the convertible yuan. The Saudis are doing that. This is the whole shift underway. And Macron and others are saying, no, we don't like it, and we're going to fight it. Well, I can tell you, sitting here in Germany and watching the reaction of the Western political establishment to seeing Presidents Putin, Xi, and Prime Minister Modi shaking hands at the Shanghai Conference, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the idea that you have these powers now that are committed to this idea of multipolarity. And this is the big change in the world. You know, the idea of breaking the unipolar system has been there since the end of World War II. The Bandung Conference in 1955, for example, there were very excellent ideas about how to break from having to choose between the Soviet Empire and the Western Empire, but there wasn't a mechanism to do that. What BRICS has done, including the expansion, bringing in Ethiopia and the United Arab Emirates and a few other countries, African countries, is to show to the world that this is a serious operation, and that the BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the two of them, actually have a larger percentage of global GDP than the G7. And so there's now an established basis for trade, for cooperation, and so on. So this is the question now. It really brings up this question of urgency, because I don't think this transitional period will go on indefinitely. I think if you look at the crazy reaction sometimes from Trump, sometimes he's got interesting ideas, and then he turns around and says that China's trying to destroy the dollar. China's not trying to destroy the dollar. The dollar is being destroyed by Western bankers. So the question then is to find, all of us have been saying, the leadership in Africa, in Latin America, in South Asia, that will orient toward the idea of these new multilateral institutions and bring about the change in thinking that's incumbent on that. And I think that's where we have an opportunity that we didn't have in the past. And the fact that China has become such a significant economic power, India also, Indonesia's on the rise, Nigeria, you have this potential, but the idea of institutional framework for it, so that it's all in one as opposed to being able to be separated and pitted against each other. That's why there's such an opportunity today. Well, first of all, what's necessary is to take a diplomatic approach to this.
Okay.
And the African countries have been left out of that for most of the last 500 years. They've been told what to do, whether they like it or not. They're not invited into the discussion. And I think what we're seeing now is a number of countries are coming up with development policies, ideas for development. We just saw the opening of the great dam in Ethiopia, for example.
Absolutely.
There's the need to deal with the shrinking of Lake Chad, and there are a number of ideas for that. There are plenty of ideas for development, many of them in the 2063 program. But now we have leaders in the world who recognize that Africa is not just a place you go to steal raw materials and labor, but that African nations are becoming mature, but it's still a process. Now, the big advantage that we have in the world today is leaders like Putin and Xi and Modi, who I would say are head and shoulders above the leaders in the West. The leaders in the West, for the most part, have been selected because of their relationship to the establishment, especially to the banks. Look, Merz, the new chancellor of Germany, was the head of BlackRock in Germany. Macron, before he became president, was working for the Rothschild Bank in France. And you have these bankers who are interested in money for themselves, greed, as opposed to leaders, I think, who are beginning to emerge, who recognize that that's a dead end. So I think the most important thing is for the development of a younger generation of leaders in Africa who can be involved in discussions with Putin, with Xi, with leaders of the BRICS. And to me, the BRICS is not a universal solution. It's a process. And it's this development process which is so important. And to be a part of that is the way that Africa can change. And from people I know, younger leaders in Africa, this is what they want. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to be part of the process. And this is a real change. And I think the institutional framework for this is now available. And it's going to be a fight, because you have to realize, as we've been saying, the Western imperial powers are not going to give up their privilege, but they're losing it because of their own stupidity and greed. And that's why there's an opportunity right now, but we have to make sure that it's not we don't copy the model of the West.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we look at the way China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty.
Sure.
It can work. Well, let me just follow up what Arthur was saying about the problem of corporations.
Yeah.
What my organization, the Schiller Institute, is doing is trying to mobilize in the United States to take away the power of these corporations by having the people find their voice and not be so passive when you have corporate control. And what I mean by that is very simple. The United States, instead of being prepared to go to war against Russia, go to war against China, threaten India, the United States policy should be very different. It should be to collaborate and cooperate with the BRICS countries and also with Africa, and to allow the idea that the continent of Africa is the future. I think the population figures, the expectations is that Africa will have, actually, 2 billion people, 3 billion people in the not too distant future, and will be a new center of international trade and commerce.
Absolutely.
And so that's the thing we have to orient toward in the United States, to take the power away from these powerful, too big to fail banks that are going to fail anyway. And for me, a democratization in the United States is one of the most important things that has to be done.